Good morning. As follows. The topic posed was Rav Chaim Streimel worth $1.8 million? Now, in full transparency, I don't know that I'm going to be able to ever answer that question, but we'll go through the inyan from both sides a little bit, and we'll see where the cheshivas for it comes from, what maybe the potential downsides, pitfalls are, and we'll see if we can find some balance between the two studim. Now, just by way of introduction, Rav Chaim Streimel is actually quite a bit of a story. Just to go back a little bit, when the shidduch between Rav Chaim Kanievsky and the daughter of Rabbi Yashiv was proposed, Rabbi Yashiv heard that Rav Chaim was a wonderful boy and he wanted the shidduch, but he didn't have a pruta in his house. Rabbi Yashiv was poor as could be at that point. And the Stipler was insisting that whoever was going to take Rav Chaim had to be given support, because Rav Chaim had to learn for the rest of his life. And Rabbi Yashiv, being a realistic person, said, listen, I would love to have him, but I can't commit to support, I can't take him. Rabbi Yashiv said no to the shidduch. Now, the Zayda, Rabbi Levine, and the other Zayda, the Chazanish, it wasn't a blood Zayda, but was a Zayda, were very upset by this start of events. And they very much felt like this is a shidduch that should happen, and they didn't want this to fall to the wayside. So the Rabbi Levine traveled to Bnei Brak and met up with the Chazanish. And they started to, figure if they could work out a plan and make the shidduch happen against the will of the Mechutanim. And the plan essentially was that they committed to pay for the wedding and to pay for the dira. Rabbi Levine found the donor, the Chazanish found the donor. Together, they paid for the wedding. But that's not what they said. The Chazanish told Rabbi Levine, tell your aid in Rabbi Yashiv that he should come be miyayetz with me about this shayla. Basically, it's a shayla in betachlim. That's what it is. It's a shayla. Could you pledge something if you're not sure you're going to have it? So Rabbi Yashiv traveled to Bnei Brak to consult with the Chazanish, and the Chazanish told him, he asked the Chazanish a shayla, I don't have the money, but I have a shidduch. Chazanish told him, Zog to and you'll have it. Commit to it and you'll have it. So Rabbi Yashiv said, okay. If Chazanish said, then we'll do the shidduch. He went home and they did the shidduch. Now really the Zog to and you'll have it was that the Chazanish and Rabbi Levine were taking care of the money. So fine, so they made it to Noyim, they have a shidduch ready to go. Now Rabbi Yashiv is a Yerushalayim family, and in Yerushalayim family, when you take an Eidim, you give the Eidim a strimel. And Rabbi Yashiv couldn't afford a strimel, even though strimels weren't $6,000, then they were only whatever they cost. Rabbi Yashiv didn't have money for a strimel. Rabbi Yashiv had his Zaydis strimel, the Leshem. The Leshem, or Litvish Bakobel, that we know from the pictures of, let's say, the Mitzid, when Rafal Shapiro, Litvaks used to wear strimels also. So he had one of those, a Litvish strimel from the Leshem, and he took the strimel and he said, here, so you have this strimel now, because I'm mechuyev to give you a strimel, you have this strimel. Rav Chaim took the strimel, and it was a nice strimel, it was a beautiful strimel. I don't think Rabbi Yashiv wore it much, and it was in good shape. Rav Chaim said, it doesn't pass that I should have such a nice strimel, and my father, the Stipler, should have the beat-up strimel that he had from Nevardik still. The Stipler wore a strimel, here and there. Chalmoyed and Yomte, a few times a year, the Stipler used to wear a strimel. He said, it doesn't pass, I should have such a fancy strimel, and my father's strimel is mamish beat up. So Rav Chaim gave the Leshem strimel to his father. Now the Stipler was not easy on his clothing. He wore things till they were mamish, Tzarisin and Zahargit. And by the time the Stipler was lifted, Rav Chaim yarshened back the Leshem strimel, it was mamish beat up. We have a picture of it. There's actually a picture of the Stipler wearing the Leshem strimel, like the Seif Yamav, and it's come out unwearable. So by the time Rav Chaim got it back, it was in bad shape. Now Rav Chaim took it, he wore it anyhow. The few times a year that he wore a strimel. Until 8-10 years ago, someone who Dreizich in Rav Chaim's house came to him and said that, it's all beat up, can I buy you a new strimel? And Rav Chaim said, sure. And he put the strimel away. I don't think anybody knows where it is. And Rav Chaim got a new strimel. Now the new strimel that Rav Chaim wore for the last few years of his life, that's the strimel that was sold for $1.8 million a week or two ago. And that's the strimel that we're dining about. Now, draw your own conclusions as to what Rav Chaim thought the cheshivas of his strimel was based on just the whole, hand passing of the strimel. Now, as follows. Now, I think that to settle the question, we won't be able to, because it really depends what community you come from, what your appreciations and sensitivities are, and there's no way to say, conclusively one way or the other. Now, there is a bunch of stories with Rav Chaim himself, with different chafetzim from Tzaddikim, and there's a little bit of a stira back and forth. I'll say one of them just to start with. They once sold a 100 shekel bill from the Stipler for thousands of dollars. They came to Rav Chaim, they told Rav Chaim about it. They asked Rav Chaim, what do you think of it? Rav Chaim said, yeah, there's Makairis, and we'll see them soon. There's Makairis, that's something that a tzaddik has value. They asked Rav Chaim, but for 10,000 shekel, they should sell it? Like, it's a guzma of money. Rav Chaim says, no, people have to make money. So he certainly understood both elements of this thing, meaning the fact that there's chshivas and the fact that people have to make money, and that creates a market for things that maybe there wouldn't be a market for. So now, I don't know which way to go. Let's go anti first, and then we'll go pro. Okay, let's go anti first, then we'll come around to pro. So the tzad that this would be maybe not a great thing. I want to read you. I want to tell you a word. It's a tragic story from the Gemara B'Metzia, and there's one line at the end that's relevant. I'll shorten the story because it takes like a blot and a half of Gemara B'Metzia. But the Gemara tells a story of Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, Rabbi Elazar the son of Reb Shimon Yochai. We've spoken about this in the past, that he was a sheriff's deputy. He would hunt down criminals, and he had a special method how to find them. And the Chachamim, his peers, were disappointed in this, and they felt that maybe he was potentially turning in Jews that shouldn't be turned in, and he was, causing damage. And they criticized him. And he told them back that, no, this is and I know I'm doing the right thing. The Gemara tells us that he made a test, like he proved that his vadayim are good, his sveikis are good. The Gemara continues and it falls off then, and then the Gemara circles back to it a blot later, where it seems like Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon never gave up this job. I mean, it seems even though Chazal censored him and they said this is not appropriate, he never gave up this job and he was still doing it. So the Gemara ends up on Pedal Amud Beis of Metzia that Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon was like in a quasi isolation. Chazal, the Chachamim didn't have a lot to do with him. He sentenced himself to a lifetime of Yisurim to try to be mechaper for potentially harming people. Some Seif, the Gemara says that his wife concocted like a potion to make him feel better, and after his Yisurim, he went back to his medrash, and they brought him, I think it's either 30 or 60 shilas, and either shilas, and he paskined all of them, mamish, right off the bat, and the Chachamim, Hayim it says they were saying, after that there's no sveikis here, everything's mamish avada, the answer. And Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon said, if there's any sveikis here, if there's no sveikis here, let them all give birth to male children. And Taka, all 60 gave birth to male children, and they all named the child Rabbi Elazar after him. So he was a great man, but it was in somewhat of a position of isolation. The Gemara tells us that eventually he dies, and he tells his wife that I know that Chachamim, they're not happy with me, and they're not going to give me my due honor by my kfura and my levaya, so just hold me in the attic. It says his wife held him in the attic, and the Gemara says it was not less than 18 years and not more than 22 years, where he was held there and his body was in perfect condition, and if you prick him, blood would come out, and they could bring a shiloh to the door and a voice would come out from the attic, meaning amazing, marvelous stuff. That's some Seif. Either Shimon ben Yochai, his father, intercedes on his behalf, or the Chachamim Stam at some point say it's too much, and he gets a kfura. Now, after the kfura, this is the part that I want to get to. After the kfura, Rebbe sends a message to his wife, and Rebbe says, now that you're an almana and I'm an almain, Rebbe says, I'd like to marry you. He sends a message, and I just want to read you the Gemara. The Gemara says, he says, Shalach Rebbe ledaber v'ishtay. Rebbe sent a message to the wife of Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, and he says, I want to marry you. Rashi says, V'inyu nesuin. So Shalchalei, she sends him back as follows. Angry message. She says, Klisha nishtamish by Kodesh. A keli, meaning me. That was nishtamish by Kodesh, by someone holy. Yishtamish by Chayil. A simpleton should get to use it now. Now, keep in mind, this is Rebbe we're talking about. But, Akavan the mashal, right, the words. Klisha nishtamish by Kodesh, yishtamish by Chayil. And then, Taman Amrin in Eretz Yisrael, the Gemara says in Eretz Yisrael, they have a phrase for this. Taman Amrin, ba'asar demari beis tali zaina. In the house that the professional hunter, the skilled hunter used to hang his bow, his tools, kol varaya kol kulase tala, a simple shepherd should hang his staff. Meaning, it's a pastish that the locker that was used, meaning we know this in sports, right? You retire the jersey, you retire the number. It doesn't pass that this hook that was used for something special should be hooked used for something basic. So, in this Gemara, I think you start having a kernel of the idea of what could be wrong with maybe a simple person acquiring the objects that belong to a great man. Meaning, lamashal, if a simple person is able to buy the gartel of the Rishon, let's say. Now, the Rishon was a Malach Elikim. He wore this gartel, on Yom Kippur when he was at his holiest moment, of the year. And then you take somebody, Yankel Goldstein, and because he has a lot of money, he's able to acquire this gartel of the Rishon, and now he wears this gartel of the Rishon on Yom Kippur. So it's together klisha nishtamish by kodesh, nishtamish by chayil. Something that was used by a holy person in a holy manner should be used by a simple person in a simple manner. Now, so Shema Tamer, this is just a story, right? It's just a story. It's just a quote. So there's the Gemara of Avodah Zarah. The Gemara of Avodah Zarah Dafid Aleph tells us as follows. It's a sugya that's talking about It's a sugya that's talking about, engaging in goyish activities. And the Gemara tells us that there's a din, sarfin ala malachim. There's a din that a Jewish king who dies, we're allowed to take all his garments, all his personal effects, and burn them, which was a goyish minig at the time, that you would take the king's effects, you'd make a big fire, and you'd burn them up. Now, the Gemara says you're allowed to do this for a Yiddish king also, sarfin ala malachim. You could take the king's effects and burn them. And then the Gemara continues, and the Gemara says, the on a nasi, you could do that. Even on a nasi Yisrael, meaning not a king, not a official position like a king, even a nasi, you could burn his clothing and his effects after he passes. The Gemara says, Ma'aseh shemeser of Gamliel Azakin, and Gamliel Azakin died, the sarafel of Onkelos Hager, Shivim Manat Suri. And Onkelos Hager oversaw the fire that burnt up 70 Manat Suri, which sounds like a lot of waste, a lot of money, a lot of fancy items, that they burnt up so that no one else should get them. They should burn up Rav Gamliel Azakin stuff. Now, this is actually brought down, lahalacha, quasi-lahalacha. The Beis Yosef in Siman Shin Mem Ches in Ilchos Avelos brings down this din that it's okay to burn the kelim of a king or a nasi after he dies, and it's not Tichugis Hagayim. Now, Afanart, the Beis Yosef and the Bach and the Levush are Masber. What's the reason? And they say this line: it's a bezayin. It's a bezayin that l'mashal, a king or a nasi or someone who's of great stature, whose clothing were his, and he's a person who wore them in a noble manner, in a holy manner, that they should then be passed on to a simpleton to just be used in any old way. This is the Bach, I think, the Levush says, he says, what does he say? This is the proper respect. The proper respect to give to the melech, or to the nasi, or to anybody of stature, is that nobody else should use his stuff when he's done using them. The exception would be a melech ben melech, a child of a king. Lamashal, if in Rishon they want to pass down, and we're going to use the Rishon as the mashal today. I don't know why, but if in Rishon they want to pass down, the Rishon is Gartel and Becher, to the Sadigera, to the Biana, to the Bahusha, and everything. They want to split it up. Fine, that makes sense, because that's a way of establishing the court. You pass down the court's items to the members of the court. But stam that a simple person should get the Gedolim of a tzaddik would seem to be something that maybe lacks a little bit of sensitivity to the tzaddik itself. Now, another nakuda, and this is from a different angle as to what could potentially be a issue over here. And this is Reb Shlomo Bavli used to talk about this all the time. Reb Shlomo Bavli liked to say that since Hasidim value Cheftzei Tzaddikim on such a high level, since Hasidim have attached such a high value to Cheftzei Tzaddikim, it created a new avera, he said, called Chassidish Genevis, where basically there's a big motivation to steal things that belong to a tzaddik. If one could find an opportunity to take something from Rebbe's house or from the Tish or whatever, the motivation is there, right? If you take the salt shaker from Tish and you're able to walk out with it, you could do very well with that. So this is Reb Shlomo's words. He said it created a musig of Chassidish Geneva. And the mashal that he used to use was as follows. He said he once heard a story. Reb Shlomo used to tell a ton of stories. They actually just put out a few books of stories from Reb Shlomo. He had a lot of stories. He said he once heard a story, and I don't know if anyone else, where the story was brought down elsewhere, but he said he once heard a story that the Baal Tanya was making his rounds through, White Russia to meet with this Hasidim, and in a certain town he was giving yichidas, and people were walking in to ask him questions, and one simple Russian peasant, a Jewish person, a Chabadka Chassid, walks in holding a big machete, and he says, Rebbe, I'm gonna kill you right here, right now. And the Rebbe says, what do I have to do to you? Why do you want to kill me? He says, Rebbe, I'm a huge Chassid. I'm a tremendous chassid of you, Rebbe. I want my town to be the town that the Baal Tanya is buried in. So this is the ends justifying the means, and this is where Shlomo Bavli used to use this story to highlight the idea of by attaching too much value to something, you generate a certain amount of negative interest. By commoditizing something that shouldn't have to be a commodity. Okay, so you make market forces. Market forces are not always great. Now, let's call it that's inside Shekeneged. Now, and we'll circle back to this piece from Shlomo Bavli a little bit later, because the Satmar Rebbe had another knetch that he would say about it. But let's first get to the other side. So let's get to the other side of the Maila of Cheftzei Tzaddikim, right? What's the benefit? So what's the inyan? So now, the best makar that there is for it is a Yerushalmi. And this Yerushalmi Grada, Rav Chaim Kanievsky used to say to people, is a story, the Rav of Shem Mincha, the Tanker, I don't think he called himself Tanker Rav, the Rav of Shem Mincha, he's the Heinkel of the Tanker, on the county line or wherever. He once went to Rav Chaim and he asked him, by own Zakman, that it's a big inyan to have the begadim, the chafetzim of a tzaddik. What does the Rav say about it? Chaim said, yeah, zicher to the Yerushalmi. So he said, would the Rabbi ask him to swap gartlich with me? If you ask him that it's an Indian, so do me a favor. I'll give you my gartel, you give me your gartel. Chaim said, swap gartlich? Give me your gartel. So the tank gave him his gartel. Chaim picks it up. It's mine? He says, yeah, it's yours. Have it back. And later he wrote him a letter saying that it's yitachin that the only cheftzei of a tzaddik that has kedusha is a cheftzei that the tzaddik actually wore. And this one you didn't wear. So we still need to do it, but that already Rav Chaim didn't do. So Rav Chaim certainly, let's say, he played a role with this. Rav Chaim certainly was not anti the idea. Rav Chaim had a big chavivus for things that belonged to people from previous days. Rav Chaim loved kisvei yadus. Rav Chaim had a big chavivus for this Indian. And Rav Chaim used to tell people this Yerushalmi. Now, I'll tell you what the Yerushalmi is, and I'll tell you an interesting nukud here. Yerushalmi says as follows. Yerushalmi is over here in Moed Katan Parak Gimel, and it's in the Darim Parak Tes. Yerushalmi has a shaila about a neder that nobody was able to be poiser, like a shver neder that nobody was able to think of out for the neder. And it says Rebbe had to say Eitzah, had to be mated this neder. So the Gemara says the Chachamim asked Rebbe, Amalon, V'lei Amrin Hadami Nolach. The Chachamim asked Rebbe, how do you know this? No one else knew this Mahal to be mated. How do you know this thing? So Rebbe says, Amar Lon, he answered them back, Misharis Reb Meir Yisi, the Barfei Shanim. I was Reb Meir's personal gabbai when he was on the run, so I spent a lot of time with him, mamish one-on-one, and I got to hear a tremendous amount of shilas that other people didn't get to hear, so I know things that no one else knows. Another tzadi says, Maklei Reb Meir haisa biyadai. The staff of Reb Meir was in my hand, v'hi haisa milamedet das, and that gave me chachma. Now this is a Yerushalmi that seems to say that Rebbe was saying, I have the physical artifact. I have Reb Meir's shtekin, I have a zilbin shtekin, and because I'm holding that in my hand, I have the ability to know things that other people don't know. It imbues me with a certain chachma that I wouldn't otherwise have. Now, this is considered the makar for the idea that Cheftzei Tzaddikim get a kedusha that becomes attached to them, and that they have a power and they have an ability to give over a certain kedusha. Now, in the sense of full transparency, the Mefarshim on the page in the Yerushalmi, the Mashal, the Pnei Moshe, the Karban Eda, they do not touch the Yerushalmi like that. Maklei Shel Reb Meir, I'll read you the Pnei Moshe. The Pnei Moshe says, he says, Maklei Shel Reb Meir Esbiyadi, lahaflagas kedushase v'shvachei Shel Reb Meir Amerkain, to be maflik, to exaggerate in the shvach and the kedusha of Reb Meir. He used the sprach. Inami hakavana mishante Shel Reb Meir ha'yisi. I was the staff of Reb Meir. I was the staff that Reb Meir was leaning on. Shayanishan of Tamid, v'lama b'menu. So Reb Meir relied on me, so maybe I learned with him. So the Pnei Moshe, for example, the Pnei Moshe, for example, is not learning this to be the pshat, that it was the physical Maklei Shel Reb Meir that was there. The Pnei Moshe is learning it. I leaned on him. He leaned on me. I'm sorry, I was the guy that he leaned on. It's just another way of saying it. Now, the funny thing to me, the interesting nekuda is that Rav Chaim has a beer on Yerushalmi Zerayim. On Yerushalmi Zerayim and Meir. Rav Chaim didn't get through the whole Shas of his beer, but he does have a beer on this Masechta. And I want to read you how Rav Chaim touches this Yerushalmi, even though Rav Chaim told this Yerushalmi to people. Rav Chaim touches this Yerushalmi as follows. He says, Yeshem Maklei Shel Reb Meir haisa biyadei. Says Rav Chaim, Mashalu. Shal Yidei Sheshimash es Reb Meir hechkim. Al Yidei that he was Reb Meir, he became wiser. So Rav Chaim Alein on this Yerushalmi does not touch this Yerushalmi the way he touches this Yerushalmi as a makar. But Yiyach Shiyah, maybe it's not Pashup Job, maybe it's just Remes in the Yerushalmi, but this is the Yerushalmi that's pointed to as the main old source that says that something that belongs to a tzaddik, something that belongs to a chacham, has major kedusha. Now, the Cheftzei Sefer brings down this Yerushalmi, for example, the Cheftzei Sefer al Torah. The Cheftzei Sefer says when he talks about Yaakov Avinu's makel, he says it's Yedua. He says the Mashma the Yerushalmi Reish Parak Veilim Megalfin the Malbushav Shel Adam Netzalim Mikdushase Shel Alev. It's Mashma from the Yerushalmi in Moed Katan. That's this Yerushalmi l'chayra, that the clothing of a person become imbued with the kedusha of that person. And here is the punchline. Now this is the nekuda. Now that's all good to say that there's a makar that the big day tzaddik become kodesh. Fine, that's good. But if we would just have a makar, the Yerushalmi that says that the big day tzaddik become kodesh, l'chayra is still the right thing to do it. That would be to burn them when he's gone, because they're holy. Why are you wearing them? Why is a simple person wearing them? They're too holy. You shouldn't be touching them. But this is a line. This the Cheftzei Sefer says already. It says the Cheftzei Sefer, "V'haleivish oisem acharov," and someone who wears them after the tzaddik, yetzal alav be'oisei ruach l'tayv. Some of that good vibe, some of that good feeling, some of that kedusha will spill over onto the person who wears them after the tzaddik. So now here you have the bridge. You make the turn. between it being just, something that has a value, so Mimela, it's something to reckon with, where potentially there's the right thing to do would still be to get rid of it, to making the turn that the Chesed says, something sticks with the person who wears them. Now, that's the Chesed Sefer. Now, in many other places, in Chassidish Yisrael, you'll find this idea that someone who wears the Gedolim of a tzaddik after the tzaddik gets imbued with a little bit of the flavor, a little bit of the kedusha of the tzaddik. He's able to latch on to some of the kedusha of the tzaddik. Now, there's another quasi-makar that I just want to share before we move on. There's another quasi-makar, there's a medrash in Shir Hashiru that talks about the base medrash of Rabbi Eliezer HaGadol. It's a story over there where Rabbi Akiva who was sitting outside, and that's not the important part. But then it says as follows: Pamachas nichnas Rabbi Shua. One time Rabbi Shua came in to this base medrash. The Gemara describes it was a narrow, long base medrash where Rabbi Eliezer used to sit in the front on a stone and talk and learning. It says Hischil Noishik Oisei Evan. Rabbi Shua came in and he started kissing the stone that Rabbi Eliezer used to sit on. Va'amar, and he said, Evan Hazois, this stone, Daim Har Sinai. The stone that Rabbi Eliezer sat on when he was Moshe Torah to Klal Yisrael is Daim Har Sinai. V'zesh Yashav Lav, and he who sat on it, behind Rabbi Eliezer, Daim L'Arein Bris, is Daim to the Aron HaKodesh. So again, you see the idea of imparting a lasting kedusha onto a physical object because a chacham, a tzaddik, a gadol sat on it or talked on it or wore it or dealt with it. Now, another example of it is there's a Yerushalmi in Brachas that says that Achoy the Imid Rav Ada, when he wanted to daven, he would ask for Rav's clothing. This is like mamish an example of a Rebbe wearing like a kittel from a Rebbe from hundreds of years ago. The Gemara says that Achoy the Imid Rav Ada, when he wanted to daven Ne'ilah and Yom Kippur, he would take the kittel, the frack of Rav and wear it. So you see again the idea of taking a beged from an old tzaddik, from a tzaddik from previous days, and wearing it to be netzal from some of that kedusha that tzaddik has. Now, these are all makaris that are a little bit together. Let's say Ascribing Kedoshim Emor, because we don't have makaris that for hundreds of years and thousands of years that different chachamei adeiros were busy trying to acquire or trying to wear the clothing or the artifacts or the becher or the gartel or the yarmulke of different chachamim. It clearly is something that became very prevalent and popular by Chassidim. But once we're looking through Chazal to try to find makaris, these are some makaris that seem to indicate that there's a kedusha. Now, just a few, vignettes of this Indian being put into play. So the Satmar Rav was a big collector of Cheftzei Tzaddikim. The Satmar Rav believed very much in getting Cheftzei Tzaddikim, and especially he had a real soft spot for the Divrei Chaim. The Satmar Rav loved to have the Chafetzer with the Divrei Chaim. And he would collect different gartlach. He had a gartel that he wore in Yom Kippur, a white gartel that was stitched into it, that it said, Ki b'yom hazeh yechaper aleichem, that the Divrei Chaim used to wear in Yom Kippur, that the Satmar Rebbe used to wear in Yom Kippur. And the Satmar Rebbe, and this to me is cute, because the Satmar Rebbe was such a collector of the Divrei Chaim's artifacts, he knew the sizing of the Divrei Chaim. Meaning he was able to tell you when you brought him an artifact if it belonged to the Divrei Chaim or not. So because I know this is not the size. And I have the Divrei Chaim's. I wore the Divrei Chaim's rekel. I have used his gartel. I have a befer. I know it's not the sizing properly. Well, Mashal, there's a story. I think they once brought a rekel to the Satmar Rebbe that they told him was the Divrei Chaim's. So he put it on, and it was very long. It was way too long in him. I don't know exactly how tall Rabbi Elish was, or how tall the Divrei Chaim was, but the rekel was too long for him. And the Satmar Rebbe told him, this rekel belongs. He told him as well. He says, I know from the Ratzverte, who was the Divrei Chaim, I know from my father. He said, I know from my father that the Ratzverte, who was the Divrei Chaim's youngest son, looked exactly like the Divrei Chaim. He was the same build as the Divrei Chaim. And the Ratzverte I saw with my eyes. This rekel wouldn't fit the Ratzverte. So this is not the Divrei Chaim's. But the Divrei Chaim had a son, Reb Arla, who was very tall. This is Mistamar Reb Arla's rekel. So meaning he had such a regilus in the chafetzim of the tzaddikim that he liked to wear. He was able to size them, pashat by, b'tvi asayin. But now, circle back to what we said from above the Rav, the Satmar Rebbe, when someone would bring him, as much as he had a great chavivus, when someone would bring him something from a Rebbe, the Satmar Rebbe would pretend he was not interested at all. There's many stories like this. They'd bring him, let's say, a becher from the Rishon, of course, and the Satmar Rebbe would say, I'm not interested, this doesn't mean anything to me. He'd say, no, but doesn't the Rebbe like to have it with it? That doesn't mean anything to me. And then the guy would say, no, but you don't understand. I got this from my father, who got it from my uncle, who got it from my grandfather, who got it. And when he would hear the whole chain of provenance, and he would hear that there was nothing stolen here, and that the person was able to, articulate exactly how he got it from the Rishner, then suddenly the light would go on. He'd say, oh, Bechel from the Rishner, can I take a drink from it? Could I use it? Could I borrow it? Because he was so cautious that he didn't want, he would say, I don't want something that has, tricky provenance. Says people are going to bring things to me. Who knows how they got it? Who knows how they get that? He used to play it cool. Not interested. When you would tell him, how you got it, how you owned it, oh, fine, then I'm interested, then I wanted it. And he would take it even a step further. He would say as follows, this that we believe, that the kli of a tzaddik, or the beged of a tzaddik, becomes imbued with a certain kedusha, because the tzaddik used it, he says that kedusha could be lost because someone else stole it. If the new owner stole it, he was kainit, so now it's the new owner who was a ganef, who owned this becher. So now this is a becher that belonged to a ganef. He said, and just like when a tzaddik owns a becher, he's able to give kedusha to the becher, when a ganef owns a becher, he's able to give bad things to the becher. So it could go in and it could go out. So the Satmar Rebbe held that it's yatzas harim efsede, mamish, whatever the milas of having a becher that has some kedusha in it, it's gone. Now there are many, it's endless amount of stories. If we're going to go down this road, there's a atara that belonged to the Yativ Lev, previous Satmar Rebbe, an atara that belonged to the Yativ Lev that the Weitzler Rav, who was an Einikel, owned. Now the Weitzler Rav wrote a sefer after the Holocaust of all the different shilas that happened in the ghetto and in the camps. It's a shreklich sefer, and in the Hakdama he writes his personal survival story of the Holocaust, and he attributes his survival through the camps to the Yativ Lev Zatara. And he says that he had a talus with the Yativ Lev Zatara. Now, when he went to the camps, he realized that to wear a talus to hide a talus in the camps was not going to be practical. So he cut off the atara, and he made a talus katan out of the atara of the Yativ Lev's talus, and he wore this talus of the Yativ Lev throughout the camps. And it's in Arichas, it's pages and pages and pages. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but he attributes his survival during the war to the Yativ Lev's atara that he turned into a talus. There's another, the Kaidin of a Rav had the tzitzis of the Baal Shem Tov in his possession, and he said that the tzitzis of the Baal Shem Tov were able to move on their own. I'd let that. This is the Kaidin, it's in a sefer, it's not Mifi Hashmua, in a sefer, Divrei Shalom, in the Kaidin of a Rav, he says, and in his family, they owned the tzitzis of the Baal Shem Tov, and they were able to move on their own. And it says, in Har Nisim V'Neflois, we're done with these tzitzis of the Baal Shem Tov. The Kazhin Tzemagid, I think, not the Kazhin Tzemagid, I'm sorry, I forget now who, he had a becher from the Zlotcheva. Had a becher of the Zlotcheva, and he said, with this becher, I could do many mice. I mean, in the Chassidus Welt, there's endless amounts of approbations and stories that attach, a tremendous amount of chashivas to different Cheftzei HaKadosh. And I think the Satmar Rebbe wrote about it himself, in Divrei Yoel several times, where he writes all these makaris, and he bolsters this idea of it being able to have Kedusha. So, I guess to summarize, one more important one. I'm sorry, one more important one. The Satmar Rebbe himself had a coin. The Divrei Chaim used to give out like a coin to his Hasidim, as a shmira. But in order that it shouldn't be stam, a wasted coin, and should have some sort of use, they would fashion the coin into kind of like a spoon. They would hammer out the end, and it would be like a small spoon. So you could use it for your tea, you could use it for little things, meaning it said that it shouldn't just be a waste. Like just a coin, they would make it a spoon. Now, the Satmar Rebbe came into possession of one of these spoons, and it was his prized possession. He would keep it on his person at all times as a shmira. He had the Divrei Chaim's, spoon coin on him as a shmira. In, 1978, I think, when the Satmar Rebbe in August was rushed to the hospital, in the ambulance, as he's being rushed to the hospital, he was motioning to the Hasidim that he doesn't have his spoon. He couldn't talk anymore. He was motioning that he doesn't have his spoon. And one of the they stopped, and one of the Ingalite who was accompanying him to the hospital jumped out and ran back home to get his spoon while they rushed to the hospital. By the time they got there, he was already nifter without the spoon. Now this is make of it what you want, but the Satmar Rebbe certainly believed in this spoon was a shmir of him. And in the hospital, on his way to Mitasei Asher Benu Leikam, he was motioning that he didn't have the Divrei Chaim spoon with him. So now, I guess, like we started, I don't know that I could ever answer the question if it's worth it, it's not worth it. But, ish l'kan l'kan. All right.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.